Now, NASA is urging the scientific community to reorient its focus toward Venus following a significant discovery that raises the possibility of the existence of life on Earth. In search of answers. Looking back at NASA records from the 1960s, reveals that the agency once portrayed Venus in a very negative light, describing it as a sort of Mars opposite. In stark contrast to the planet's inferno, gradually, Mars took center stage in space missions, and this selective focus on the inner planet's characterization was not accidental. In the midst of the ferocious space race, the Soviet Union heavily invested in sending numerous expensive spacecraft to Venus. Despite its hostile and unpleasant conditions that demonstrated little potential for hosting life, despite the Soviet Union's commitment to the Venera program, priorities did not change until the fall of the USSR, an event influenced in part by economic strain. Thanks to insights from astrophysicists like Neil deGrasse Tyson, we now have a better understanding of the motivations behind these missions. In this discussion, we'll explore newly available, previously classified photographs of Venus taken before the dissolution of the Soviet Union. The USSR didn't just shift global geopolitics, it also buried many secrets. Known for its secrecy, the Soviet Union maintained one of the most enigmatic space agencies, cloaking mysterious encounters with aliens and harboring numerous unspoken truths. Before the United States took the lead in planetary exploration, was actually the Soviets who dominated early space activities. The USSR's ambitious efforts were largely focused on Venus, regarded as hellish and practically uninhabitable. In Russia, Venus was referred to as Venera, the name given to their series of missions that ran for more than 2 decades, from 1961 to 1983. During the same period, the United States was busy executing lunar missions. Strategically, the Soviets shifted their attention to a different celestial body. Their fascination with Venus was not entirely irrational. Perhaps they had plans to use the planet's surface as a strategic military outpost, or maybe they genuinely sought to colonize it or to search for alien life. Given that these expeditions occurred at the height of the Cold War, the USSR was naturally secretive about their objectives and goals. Only one of their Venus missions was publicly acknowledged. The information we now possess about these operations comes from declassified files and recovered documents, many of which still leave unanswered questions. What exactly were the Soviets looking for? And did they discover anything revolutionary? The discoveries made while exploring Venus weren't limited to a few attempts, far from it. The USSR launched a total of 28 missions to Venus. 13 probes entered the planet's dense atmosphere, and 8 managed successful landings. This gave the Soviet Union a significant edge in extraterrestrial research at the time, while NASA also made notable progress. Its main interest lay in orbital technology and satellite development rather than surface exploration, especially on Venus. NASA paid more attention to Mars later on. A lesser-known fact is that the Soviet space program was the first to send a probe into the atmosphere of another world. The USSR was also the first to achieve a soft landing on another planet, and the first to return images and even audio recordings from its surface. These achievements echoed the same monumental spirit as the U.S. moon landing, yet they are barely acknowledged in the common narratives of space exploration. This neglect is largely due to the Soviet Union's penchant for secrecy. When the USSR officially dissolved in 1992, the space agency was dismantled and later restructured under the new Russian Federation. During this transition, many important documents and technical information from the Venera program were either destroyed or lost. This is one reason why our understanding of the USSR's motivations for exploring Venus remains hazy. However, a logical assumption is that the Soviets opted for Venus not because they lacked aspirations about Mars, but because Venus was closer, less expensive to reach, and provided a pragmatic opportunity to study habitability. They were investigating elements such as sunlight presence, water availability, geological structure, and radiation levels without the extensive information obtained from these Missions measuring extremes in temperature and Venus dense, toxic atmosphere we couldn't know much about the planet. Today, many astronomers are convinced that Venus is not suitable for life. Its surface is hot enough to melt lead. It has no water, and its atmospheric pressure is hundreds of times greater than Earth's. However, disregarding the USSR's massive contribution to Venus exploration would essentially rewrite history. From the Soviet viewpoint, Venus was always worthwhile even if the primary goal was merely to demonstrate dominance in the ongoing space rivalry. While Mars was a more enticing option for human habitation, the Soviets never completely discounted it, yet it required substantially more investment. Venus, being much closer to Earth at an average distance of 40 million km compared to Mars' 250 million kilometers, meant that mission costs were significantly lower. This was a crucial consideration for a nation that lacked the economic firepower of the United States. Soviet missions were frequently plagued by malfunctions and performance issues. It is well established that many of their spacecraft suffered from design flaws and communication breakdowns. That's precisely why they focused on Venus, a closer target with a higher probability of achieving measurable results. Without the context of the space race, we lose much of the significance of the Venera missions. Keep in mind, it was the USSR that launched Sputnik 1 in 1957, the first ever artificial satellite. This sparked an intense rivalry between the two superpowers. While NASA concentrated on the Moon, the Soviets zeroed in on Venus. Interestingly, NASA's initial efforts to explore Venus failed repeatedly. The American agency found itself stuck in what came to be known as the curse of Venus. Multiple probes were lost or malfunctioned upon entry due to Venus' volatile atmosphere, seizing the opportunity. The Soviet Union intensified its Venus exploration efforts. Given that both nations were determined to win the space race, a kind of strategic division of labor emerged. The U.S. took the Moon, and the Soviets took Venus. The USSR's unrelenting pursuit of Venus missions was a direct attempt to outpace the United States in space science despite limited resources and bureaucratic hurdles. In fact, the Soviet Union managed to send more missions to Venus than any other nation. In response, the West minimized Venus' significance, labeling it a scorching wasteland while promoting Mars as humanity's future home. This narrative was reinforced by popular media, where Venus was demonized and Mars idealized. But for the Soviets, this wasn't about public opinion. It was about proving Venera's superiority. Despite being largely overlooked today, the Venera program was an incredibly sophisticated and ambitious undertaking. If any single project marks the true beginning of the modern era in planetary science, it would be these missions. As far back as the 1950s, Soviet engineers and scientists began building and experimenting with early probe designs. Over the next 30 years, they refined their models and deployed a series of spacecraft to Venus, often under intense geopolitical constraints. Despite these challenges, USSR had early advantages, such as greater payload capacity and scientific focus, making it a true pioneer in planetary exploration. Capacity. This ability made it possible for the Soviets to construct heavier launch spacecraft that could withstand the harsh conditions of space travel. By the Soviet Union, the scientific community was at the same time refining mathematical models to determine precise flight paths and gravitational influences necessary for successful landings on Mars. Missions were also progressing, but Venus was always the main target. One of their most notable accomplishments was Venera 3's debut in 1966. The first object made by humans to reach Venus and come into physical contact with its surface. While U.S. missions frequently ended in disaster, the USSR's program was gradually improving. The Soviets succeeded despite occasional setbacks and repeatedly sent probes that entered Venus's thick atmosphere and sometimes landed. One recurring challenge was the constrained design and size capability of their spacecraft. But these problems were eventually resolved, especially in the 1970s. when the Soviet Union began deploying its most advanced Venera models. They even managed to complete the first dual launches that decade, Venera 4 and Venera 5. The decade, according to many historians, was a golden era of planetary science, although NASA attempted to duplicate these intricate configurations. Of Soviet launch vehicles, the Soviets had already mastered the technique. The purpose behind dual spacecraft data precision was achieved by launching two similar yet individually optimized Soviet probes with the goal of gathering atmospheric and surface data from multiple layers. Venera 4 surveyed the planet and entered its atmosphere successfully. Venera 5 followed with specific enhancements to collect more detailed readings. These probes were designed to resist Venus's radiation, extreme heat, and pressure. In the mid-1970s, the program progressed even further, entering a phase in which every aspect of the insulation-based design of the Venera materials and communication systems was being perfected. With every successful mission, the Soviet Union got closer to knowing Venus like never before. One of the most well-known launches was Venera 7, which became the first probe to transmit data from the surface of another planet. The Soviets had already established the planet's extreme environmental conditions, and now they were recording its audio in the 1980s. The Venera program reached its technical pinnacle. Venera 13 produced the first ever colored panoramic photographs of Venus. Additionally, the twin probe Venera 14 was sent to gather comparable data sets. The Soviet Union was one of the first countries to thoroughly investigate. Roscosmos, the current space agency in Russia, has recently renewed interest in Venus-related missions. A collaborative venture with NASA named Venera is already in the planning stages, scheduled for a tentative launch in the late 2020s or early 2030s. This mission will use new types of instruments designed to analyze Venus's geology and atmosphere, aspects that point toward detecting evidence of a possible past or current form of life. The mission will include a lander, an orbiter, and possibly even an inflatable aerial device to investigate Venus's thick cloud cover on a larger scale. The legacy of the Venera missions goes far beyond scientific findings or geopolitical imagery that began during the Cold War. These missions exemplify human ingenuity and the persistent search for knowledge despite overwhelming technical, financial, and political obstacles. Soviet scientists, insistent on their novel use of robotic instruments for climate and terrain analysis, provided the foundation for modern planetary science. Their pioneering efforts resulted in important insights into Venus's harsh climate, including crushing pressure, extreme temperatures, and an environment full of sulfuric acid and carbon dioxide. The technological strides made during this era also influenced broader space exploration efforts. Heat shield technology, communication systems, and landing mechanisms developed for Venera would go on to benefit later missions to Mars and other planets. The design philosophies born from the Venera program inform current aerospace engineering strategies. Socially and politically, these missions were also significant in the context of the space race. Each Venera launch was not just a scientific event, but a demonstration of technological prowess and ideological competition. When Venera 7 landed in 1970 and transmitted data from the surface of Venus, it was a massive accomplishment that demonstrated the USSR's capability to overcome extreme environmental obstacles. Scientific instruments aboard the probes were equipped with imaging systems that captured the first close-up visuals of Venus's surface. These photographs revealed rugged landscapes with volcanic and rocky features, helping scientists trace the planet's geological development. Subsequent missions like Venera 13 and 14 continued this work and improved our understanding of Venus's terrain and mineral makeup. Naturally, the Venera program experienced a few setbacks. Some missions failed to reach Venus or suffered system failures that prevented successful data transmission. The weather, including temperatures exceeding 450 degrees Celsius, 842 degrees Fahrenheit, and sulfuric acid clouds presented enormous obstacles for spacecraft functionality and durability. Nevertheless, the perseverance of Soviet scientists allowed them to break through these barriers. Their legacy lives on today. The space agencies, including NASA, prepare for upcoming Venus explorations. One such mission, Vijay's initiative, is being proposed. Envisioned as a joint undertaking between NASA and Roscosmos, it is based on the scientific and technological achievements of the Venera missions. Vijay's aims to investigate Venus more thoroughly than ever before, exploring its geology, atmospheric chemistry, tectonic activity, and potential for harboring life. As we look forward to this next chapter in Venus exploration, it is important to remember that these endeavors build upon the legacy of Soviet scientists and engineers. Those who dared to reach out to a planet long regarded as too hostile to matter. Their work laid the foundation for all future Venus missions and fundamentally altered our understanding of what lies beyond Earth.